The Machinist, a 2004 thriller directed by Brad Anderson, stars an emaciated Christian Bale as Trevor Resnick, a machinist who suffers insomnia and must come to terms with his own sanity. Now, before we dive into this analysis, I want to give a quick spoiler warning for those who haven't seen this great film yet, so here's your chance to watch it for yourself and come back to the analysis. Throughout the film, Trevor attempts to uncover the mystery of Ivan, played by John Shaharian, and the various notes strewn about his apartment. He fosters two relationships with two vastly different women, one, Stevie, a prostitute played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, and the other, a waitress, named Maria, played by Aitana Sanchez-Gayon. After a psychotic journey into an attempt to prove the guilt and existence of Ivan, and bring justice to Maria's murdered son at the hands of his, well, weird toe hands, the film eventually concludes by revealing that Resnick was actually the murderer of Maria's son all along, and Ivan was merely a manifestation of his own guilt and grief. And speaking of guilt, the film is not shy about alluding to its Dostoevskian influences, whether by the fact that Trevor is seen reading The Idiot, or by the fact that the amusement park ride says Crime and Punishment on a sign, or the fact that he gets notes from Underground. Okay, that one might be a bit of a stretch. The film matches many of the traditional character archetypes that we see in Dostoevsky's work, such as the redemptive prostitute that we see in Sonia from Crime and Punishment. Additionally, Trevor mirrors the protagonist of The Idiot, Prince Mishkin, a young man who spent much of his time in a sanatorium, foreshadowing Resnick's insanity, as well as battling between the love of two women. Dostoevsky's novella, The Double, even is relevant here as we see plenty of equal and opposite characters in this film. For example, Ivan can be seen as a devil, while Maria can be seen as an angel, but none of them are real, so they're kind of equal in a way. These Dostoevskian themes such as religion and redemption, mental illness and hallucinations, crime and guilt, are highly correlated to The Machinist and offer a glimpse into how to cope with grief. The most apparent and memorable aspect of this film, of course, is how absolutely skeletal Resnick looks. Stevie even makes a joke about how if he were any skinnier, he wouldn't exist, and Ivan comments that it looks like he has seen a ghost, setting up the foreshadowing that Trevor really is running from the ghosts of his past, and how Ivan does not actually exist. Trevor accounts for his ghoulish appearance by his lack of sleep, but by the end of the film, we realize it is due to his guilt of committing the hit and run on Maria's child, manifesting and taking a physical toll on his physique. Grief is a complex emotion that takes many forms in humans, but it is most commonly represented in Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief theory. This theory attempts to explain how grief manifests in the events of the loss of a loved one. Resnick does not actually personally lose anyone in his life during the film. However, he does lose himself in a sense of who he has become after he runs away from the scene of the accident, and the film tracks how he can cope with himself, knowing he is a horrible person. In fact, Ivan is the embodiment of everything Trevor hates about himself, and spends the whole movie trying to prove he is someone else, only to uncover that Ivan, a selfish murderer, is who he really is. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard this theory, but let's quickly run through it as it relates to The Machinist. The first and most obvious is Trevor's denial. He genuinely believes Ivan is an entirely separate and real person from him, despite all the clear warnings from the people around him. Instead of facing the truth, he must make up an elaborate conspiracy to conform to his delusional worldview. We see literal red herrings in the form of the fish head in his freezer, the ghosts of the truth that Trevor keeps frozen in place to avoid getting his hands messy. Next, we have anger. We see Trevor taking out his frustration on Stevie when he falsely believes that Ivan was her ex-husband. He viewed Stevie as someone close to him, someone he trusted and had nice camaraderie with. So his delusions of her having ties to Ivan caused him to feel betrayed and played for a fool. Violence and anger are a form of projection of self-loathing, much as we see with the unnamed narrator from Notes from Underground, where he fantasizes about punching his old classmates that made a fool of him during his dinner. In a way, both of these characters are angry and hate other people because they view other people as better than them and must lash out to maintain their ego. We also see some aspects of bargaining from Trevor. With bargaining, victims try to regain a sense of control over their life by making promises or giving things away, as if making a deal would somehow bring someone back to life. He offers extremely generous tips to Stevie because he feels bad for her life of prostitution. Offering generous tips to someone he views as socially beneath him is a way to make himself feel good, and reclaim some sense of his ego and identity. Trevor even wishes there was some way he could repay his coworker who lost his arm at the hands of him, in which the man replies,
Well, for starters, you can give me your left arm.
It is clear that Trevor cannot bargain away all of his irrevocable damage that he causes to other people's lives. Throughout the whole film, it could be argued that he is exhibiting signs of depression as well. He is lethargic and miserable most of the time, and cannot really seem to find much purpose or hope in his day-to-day life. He pushes away the people that are closest to him and retreats more and more into isolation and his own head. And of course, severe fluctuations in weight are often typical in depression as well. And lastly, we see his acceptance when he finally decides to turn himself into the police and ends up in jail. He finally faces his guilt, and because of that, he is able to get some relief in the form of being able to sleep again. You know, it's easy to think of Trevor as just a horrible person for the crime he committed and the pain he has caused by his reckless and selfish deed. But even though he was the perpetrator, he also suffered. Much like Raskolnikov at the end of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, we see that even the guilty suffer, and the only way to relieve that suffering is through accepting culpability. And it's funny that in the American justice system, we use the term guilty to determine whether a crime was committed. However, it says nothing about the perpetrator's feelings about their crime. There does seem to be a connection, however, as accepting a guilty sentence seems to be a way of alleviating your own personal guilt about a crime. Trevor knows he can never undo his actions or bring the child back from death, but him accepting his guilt allows him to overcome much of his grief. Much like Raskolnikov, he decides to voluntarily turn himself in, because not only does he accept that he is guilty of the crime, but also feels tremendous guilt, which is keeping him trapped, just like Stevie or Maria. In a way, he feels more free to be in the prison cell than in the outside world, as he can actually be himself and he can know he can live with himself now. I think Trevor put it best when he said,
"A little guilt goes a long way."
Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching another episode of ThoughtTime. If you want to hear more about Dostoevsky and suffering, you can check out my comparison of Crime and Punishment and A Clockwork Orange. Otherwise, if you just want to show your support, feel free to subscribe or leave a comment down below. I'll do my best to respond to any questions or discussions you want to have. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, take care.